the timeless past.
The Palace on the Water. The year is 1856. The United States is a nation on the move, a sprawling, ambitious country pushing ever westward. Forget roads or rails. The real highways of this great expansion are the mighty, untamed rivers. And on these rivers, the kings of transport are the steamboats. They are floating palaces, technological marvels of steam and timber, carrying people, their dreams, and the very building blocks of civilization to a raw, unforgiving frontier. Among the grandest of these vessels is the steamboat Arabia. Built in a Pittsburgh shipyard just 3 years earlier, the Arabia is a testament to the era's ambition. She's a sidewheeler, 171 feet long, with 2 massive paddle wheels churning the muddy water and a powerful steam engine at her heart. Her twin smokestacks belch thick, black smoke into the prairie sky, a signal of progress you could see for miles. To the settlers of the time, the Arabia wasn't just a boat, it was a lifeline. It was a floating general store, a post office, and a connection to the life they'd left behind. On a late summer day in St. Louis, its decks are buzzing with activity. Longshoremen are sweating under the sun, loading crate after crate into its cavernous hold. The manifest reads like a shopping list for building a new world. There are barrels of Kentucky whiskey and crates of French champagne. There are tools of every kind imaginable, axes for felling trees, hammers and nails for raising homes, and plows for turning the stubborn prairie soil. But it's also packed with goods meant to turn a crude cabin into a home. Fine English china, delicate porcelain dolls, and stylish silver-plated utensils. Bolts of colorful fabric, ready to be sewn into dresses. There are thousands of leather boots and shoes, hats of every shape and size. The Arabia is carrying 200 tons of merchandise, a treasure trove destined for 16 different towns on the frontier. It's a snapshot of an entire economy, all packed tightly into the belly of a single ship. On board are roughly 130 passengers, a perfect cross-section of the westward expansion. There are merchants, families seeking a fresh start, and lone adventurers drawn by the lure of the unknown. For them, the journey up the Missouri River is both an adventure and an ordeal. The Missouri, better known as the Big Muddy, isn't a gentle stream. It's a powerful, destructive force of nature. Its current is swift and its water is so full of silt you can't see a foot below the surface. And hiding in that murky water are snags. These are entire trees that have fallen into the river, their roots stuck in the mud while their sharpened trunks point downstream like giant wooden spears, waiting just below the waterline. They were the silent ship killers, responsible for sinking over 400 steamboats on the Missouri alone. But on the evening of September 5, 1856, as the Arabia steams upstream near what is now Kansas City, the mood is relaxed. The day's journey is almost over. Passengers are strolling the decks, watching the sunset. The rhythmic churn of the paddle wheels is a comforting, constant rhythm. There is, however, one passenger who seems to have a premonition of doom. A mule, tied up on the deck, suddenly becomes agitated, kicking and straining at its ropes, as if it could sense a danger that no one else could see. The sinking. The moment it happened was both sudden and shockingly quiet. 1 minute, the Arabia was gliding through the water. The next, there was a deafening crack. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sickening sound of thick wooden planks splintering as a massive force tore through the hull. The boat had struck a snag. A huge, submerged walnut tree trunk had pierced its side like a spear. The impact was catastrophic. Cold, brown water surged into the cargo hold. The pilot knew instantly the wound was fatal. The Arabia was going down, and it was going down fast. Panic erupted on the decks as the calm evening was shattered by shouts of alarm. Passengers who had been enjoying the sunset were now scrambling for their lives. But in the middle of the chaos, people showed remarkable courage. The crew began directing passengers to the shore, which was thankfully within reach. One man reportedly grabbed onto the long ears of that panicked mule and was pulled to safety as the animal swam frantically for the bank. The Arabia sank with astonishing speed. Within minutes, the immense weight of its cargo pulled the ship down, settling it firmly into the thick, muddy riverbed. As the sun disappeared, the twin smokestacks, the proud symbols of the ship's power, were the last things to vanish beneath the surface. By morning, there was nothing left to see. The river had swallowed the Arabia whole. Miraculously, every single person survived. The only casualty was the poor, unfortunate mule, which had been tied to deck equipment. For the people shivering on the riverbank, it was a moment of profound loss. Their possessions, their merchandise, their future, all of it was locked away at the bottom of the Missouri River. In the years that followed, people tried to salvage the valuable cargo, but the river was just too powerful. The current was too strong, the water too murky. Eventually, the Arabia faded from memory into local legend. And then, the river itself decided to hide the evidence completely. Over the next century, the Missouri River changed its course. The bend where the Arabia sank was cut off, slowly filling with silt and sand. What was once the main channel of a continent became a quiet marsh, and then, finally, dry land. Farmers planted corn where a steamboat once sank. The river was now half a mile away. The Arabia was no longer at the bottom of a river. It was buried deep beneath a Kansas cornfield, waiting. The treasure hunters. Fast forward to the 1980s. The world is a different place. The legends of lost steamboats are just stories for history buffs. But some stories have a way of taking root in the right kind of mind. Enter Bob Hawley. Bob wasn't a historian or an archaeologist. He owned a heating and air conditioning business in Independence, Missouri. He was a practical man, a problem solver. And he was fascinated by the legends of the river. The idea of finding a lost steamboat became a consuming passion, one he shared with his sons, Greg and David, and a couple of family friends. Together, they formed a kind of modern-day treasure hunting team. But they weren't looking for pirate gold, they were looking for a time capsule. Their quest began in the library. 4 years, they spent their evenings and weekends poring over dusty 19th-century river maps and scrolling through microfilm of old newspapers, searching for any mention of a sunken steamboat. They cross-referenced old maps with modern ones, trying to superimpose the river of 1856 onto the landscape of 1987. The name that kept popping up was the Arabia. The legend said it was a magnificent ship with a spectacular cargo. But their first attempts were frustrating. They dug hole after hole, chasing false leads and coming up with nothing but mud. Bob, however, was undeterred. He believed technology was the key. He bought a proton magnetometer, a highly sensitive metal detector, and learned to read its subtle signals. He and his sons walked for miles, back and forth across muddy fields, their eyes glued to the bouncing needle. Finally, in the summer of 1987, their research led them to a farm in Wyandotte County, Kansas. The old maps suggested the river once made a sharp bend right through the property. Today, it was just a flat, unremarkable cornfield. But the magnetometer was going wild. It showed a massive amount of metal, spread out over an area roughly the size and shape of a steamboat. This was their most promising lead yet, but they needed more proof. So they brought in a drilling rig to take core samples. They pushed a hollow tube deep into the ground. First, topsoil. Then, layers of sand and silt. And then, at about 45 feet down, the drill bit hit something hard. Wood. They pulled up the sample and held a piece of timber, blackened with age. They drilled again, a few feet away. This time, they brought up more wood, and a small rubber shoe. It was perfectly preserved. They knew. The excitement was electric. After years of searching, they had found it. The legend was real. The steamboat Arabia was lying directly beneath their feet. Now, the easy part was over. The truly monumental challenge was about to begin. How on earth do you dig up a 171-foot-long steamboat from what is basically an underground lake? The Great Excavation. Finding the Arabia was one thing. Digging it up was another. The ship was entombed in what's known as an alluvial aquifer, not just mud, but water-saturated sand. The moment they started digging, groundwater would pour into the hole. They weren't just digging a hole, they had to hold back an underground river. Their solution was audacious. They decided to surround the entire site with a ring of 20 deep water wells, each 65 feet deep. These wells were connected to a network of pipes and powerful industrial pumps. The plan: pump the water out of the ground faster than it could flow back in, lowering the water table and creating a relatively dry hole to work in. In late November of 1988, the work began. They brought in bulldozers, front-end loaders, and a massive crane. The pumps roared to life and began to draw water from the earth. The numbers are just staggering. To keep the site from flooding, They had to pump out 20,000 gallons of water every single minute, 24 hours a day. All of it was piped half a mile away and back into the Missouri River. They were in a race against time, working through a brutal Midwest winter of snow, ice, and sub-zero temperatures. The hole grew larger and deeper, eventually becoming the size of a football field. It was cold, muddy, exhausting work. Then, about 2 weeks in, they saw it. At the bottom of the massive pit, a dark shape began to emerge from the mud. It was the top of the Arabia's paddle wheel. The sight was breathtaking. It was real. Reinvigorated, the team switched from heavy machinery to careful, hands-on work. As they dug deeper, the full outline of the ship appeared. And then, they breached the main deck. They had just broken the seal on the time capsule. The mud that had buried the ship was a thick, blue clay, and it was completely without oxygen. This anaerobic environment, combined with the cold temperatures, had created the perfect conditions for preservation. It had stopped decay almost completely. What they were about to find had been sitting in a state of suspended animation for 132 years. A lost world uncovered. The moment they peered into the cargo hold, the dig transformed from an excavation into a world-class archaeological discovery. They weren't just uncovering a shipwreck, they were opening a door into 1856. They pried open the lid of the first wooden crate. The team fell silent. Inside, nestled in packing straw, were dozens of pieces of fine English china, looking as if they were made yesterday. Not a single chip. They opened another crate, and another, finding stacks of elegant platters and delicate teacups. The discoveries came thick and fast. Each day brought a new wonder. They found a carpenter's toolbox, and inside, the saws were still sharp. They uncovered bolts of fabric, some still vibrant with color. They found thousands of glass beads, destined for trade or for decorating a frontier wife's dress. The sheer volume of cargo was astounding. There were at least 4,000 shoes and boots in the latest styles. There were felt and beaver fur hats, stacked neatly in their boxes. They found crates of French perfume, bottles of cologne, and even hairpins. It was the complete inventory of a frontier department store. And then there was the food. This might be the most incredible part. They found hundreds of jars of preserved food, their wax seals unbroken. They uncovered jars of pickles, and when they opened one, the scent of dill filled the cold winter air. One of those pickles has a good claim to being the oldest edible pickle in the world. They found jars of pie fillings, cherries, blueberries, apples, all still looking vibrant. They even found bottles of champagne, the corks still holding fast. The team had to work quickly. The moment these artifacts hit the air, they began to decay. They set up an impromptu preservation lab on site, moving each item from the mud into water-filled tubs to keep them stable. What they found wasn't chests of gold. It was something far more valuable, a complete, unblemished portrait of daily life. The elegant china spoke of a family's hope to bring civility to a rugged new home. The sturdy tools spoke of the hard work needed to build a community from scratch. The children's toys, marbles and small porcelain dolls, spoke of the universal need for innocence, even in the harshest of places. In the end, they recovered over 200 tons of artifacts, the largest collection of pre-Civil War frontier supplies in the world. As winter ended, true to their word, the Hollies filled the massive hole back in. Today, corn grows in that Kansas field, with no sign of the treasure that was once buried 45 feet below. The hull of the Arabia, too large to move, was left to be reburied, its job as a time capsule complete. The legacy of the Arabia. The Holly family had spent a fortune of their own money to excavate the Arabia. Now they owned the world's greatest collection of pre-Civil War artifacts, but they had a new problem. What do you do with it? Museums were interested, but they only wanted to pick out the best items and break up the collection. For the Hollies, that was unthinkable. The power of the treasure was in its completeness. It was the entire collection, seen together, that told the full story. So, they made another audacious decision. Just as they had become treasure hunters and excavators, they would now become museum curators. They decided to build their own museum. They found a space in Kansas City's historic city market, not far from the river that once claimed the Arabia. They spent years painstakingly cleaning and preserving hundreds of thousands of artifacts. It was a monumental scientific undertaking. In 1991, the Arabia Steamboat Museum opened its doors. Walking through it is like walking through a general store in 1856. You can see rows of intact leather boots, gleaming as if they were just polished. You see the fine china, set for a dinner party that never happened. You see the tools, the toys, and the jars of still perfectly preserved pickles. At the heart of the museum is a full-scale reconstruction of the Arabia's deck, with its massive, restored steam engine and paddle wheel standing in the center. The Arabia Steamboat Museum tells two equally incredible stories. The first is about the pioneers of 1856, whose hopes and dreams were packed in those wooden crates. The second is the story of the Hawley family, the modern-day pioneers who moved a river, dug up a legend, and gave the world a priceless gift, a perfectly preserved moment of its own past. The museum's work of preservation is never truly finished, as they continue to study and care for this incredible collection. It's a testament to the idea that some treasures aren't made of gold, but of wood, glass, leather, and the stories they tell. We have to ask, what artifact from the Steamboat Arabia amazed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.